She walked into that bar wanting one night of invisibility. No last name, no empire to protect, no expectations to carry. He was already there, sitting in the dark, like a man who knew exactly how heavy silence could get. They were supposed to be enemies. They were supposed to stay strangers. But the moment their eyes met across that room, something shifted, quiet, irreversible, and terrifying. This is the story of two people who tried to resist the wrong person, and failed beautifully. Let me introduce you to our new app, Allure TV. It's super simple to get started. You log in with Google or your email. In a few seconds you're in. This here is the home screen. Look how amazing it is. We feature dozens of intense, uncensored romance stories, organized by genre. We have mafia, billionaire, forbidden love, and contract romance themes. We have absolutely everything you could ever want. And the best part, no ads and no interruptions. Now look at this. Click here on the audio and start listening right away. You can even choose your preferred language. There's Portuguese, English, German, French. If you prefer to read, just click here on the ebook and that's it. The whole story appears for you to read at your own pace. And you can even interact. You are welcome to rate the story with stars and leave a comment. You can also add your favorite stories to a playlist and access them whenever you like. Do you like what you see? Go ahead and log in now. It is simple and free. You can find the link in the first pinned comment. The bar didn't have a name on the outside, just a black door, a faint amber glow bleeding through the frosted glass, and the kind of quiet that Manhattan rarely offered on a Thursday night. Emma Calloway pushed it open like someone who had already decided she wasn't going to think too hard about anything. Not tonight. She needed this. Not the drink, exactly. Not the music, which was low and unhurried, a jazz pianist working through something melancholy in the corner. She needed the anonymity, the particular freedom of being no one's daughter, no one's successor, no one's carefully managed public image. Just a woman in a black wrap dress and heels she'd worn all day, sliding onto a bar stool and exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks. The bartender caught her eye, and she ordered a whiskey sour without hesitating. Around her, conversations murmured like background static. A couple argued softly near the window. Two men in loosened ties debated something with tired energy. Nobody looked at her twice. That was the point. She wrapped both hands around her glass when it arrived, and let herself simply exist for a moment. No agenda, no strategy, no carefully worded responses to board members who spoke to her like she was still 22 and learning. Just the cold condensation against her palms and the burn of good whiskey settling in her chest. It was when she finally looked up that she saw him. He was in the far corner, half swallowed by shadow, sitting with the particular stillness of someone who wasn't hiding, but also wasn't advertising his presence. A glass of something dark in front of him, a jacket draped over the chair beside him, his shirt collar open at the throat. He was looking at his phone with the expression of a man who wasn't actually reading anything on it. Emma's stomach dropped. Ryan Callister. Of all the unremarkable bars in all of Manhattan, Ryan Callister was sitting in the corner of this one, and he had already looked up from his phone, had, in fact, been looking at her for at least 3 seconds before she registered it. His expression didn't shift dramatically, just a slight tension in the jaw, recognition, and something harder to name. She should have left. The thought moved through her clearly and was immediately overruled by something less rational. She turned back to the bar, took a slow sip of her drink and told herself she was simply finishing what she'd paid for. "You picked the wrong bar," his voice came from just over her left shoulder. She hadn't heard him approach. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. "Actually," she said, not turning around, "I was here first." A pause. Then the sound of him settling onto the bar stool 1 seat away, not beside her, not far. Precisely calibrated distance, she thought. Very Ryan Callister. "Fair point," he said. She turned then because ignoring him felt more telling than acknowledging him. Up close, he looked like someone who'd also had a long day and had made the same calculation she had. That tonight, the office could wait. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes. His watch caught the amber light. "You look terrible," she said pleasantly. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "You look like you're lying about being fine." The words landed differently than she expected. Not cruel, almost perceptive. She held his gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. "I am fine," she said. "Of course you are." The pianist shifted into something slower, and the low melody wrapped around the silence between them like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Emma looked away first, back to her drink, aware of the warmth radiating from where he sat, close enough that she could catch the faint scent of his cologne, something cedar dark and clean. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she'd finish the drink and leave. She told herself a lot of things in those first 5 minutes, and the night had barely even started. Emma didn't leave after the first drink. She told herself it was because the whiskey sour was particularly good that night, and because the pianist had just shifted into something she almost recognized, a melody that hovered at the edge of memory without quite landing. It had nothing to do with the man sitting 1 seat away, who had ordered another drink of his own, and returned to the pretense of checking his phone. They didn't speak for several minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, the kind you had to consciously hold in place, like pressing a hand against something that wanted to move. Ryan broke it first. "You're not going to ask what I'm doing here?" "I already know what you're doing here," Emma said. "Same thing I am, pretending the last 12 hours didn't happen." He set his phone face down on the bar. A small gesture, but she noticed it. "And what happened in your last 12 hours? Nothing I'm discussing with you." "Fair." He picked up his glass. "Mine involved a conference call that should have been an email, and a board member who used the phrase synergistic alignment 14 times. I counted." Despite herself, Emma felt the corner of her mouth betray her. 14. "I started counting at 6. Could have been higher." She looked at him sideways. This was the thing about Ryan Callister that no one in any boardroom ever talked about, that underneath the precision and the ruthlessness and the reputation that preceded him into every room, there was occasionally something dry and unexpectedly human. She'd caught glimpses of it in meetings, quickly buried under whatever position he was there to defend. She didn't trust it. But she noticed it. "What are you drinking?" she asked. "Bourbon. Neat." "Of course." "What does that mean?" "It means you're exactly the kind of person who drinks bourbon neat and wants everyone to know it." He turned to look at her fully then, and she felt the shift in attention like a change in air pressure. His eyes were darker in this light, more considering than combative, which was not the version of him she was accustomed to. "And what does a whiskey sour say about a person?" he asked. "That she knows what she likes and doesn't feel the need to perform simplicity." A beat of silence. Then, and she almost missed it, the quiet exhale through his nose that was Ryan Callister's version of a laugh. "You've been sharpening that one for a while," he said. 30 seconds, actually. The pianist finished his set and began again from somewhere quieter. The couple near the window had stopped arguing and were now leaning toward each other, whatever the disagreement was folded away for later. Emma watched them for a moment, then looked back at her glass. "So you're not what I expected," Ryan said. His voice had changed slightly, less tactical, more honest in a way that made her instinctively cautious. "You don't know me well enough to have expectations. I know your quarterly reports, your acquisition strategy, the way you handled the Mercer deal, which was incidentally impressive." Something tightened in her chest, not quite pleasure, more like the complicated feeling of being seen by someone you'd rather keep at a distance. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. From Ryan Callister, those are the same thing. He looked at her again, and this time he didn't look away quickly. The bar light caught the angle of his jaw, the slight tension there, and Emma became acutely aware that she had leaned, at some point in the last few minutes without deciding to, fractionally in his direction. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough that she noticed. She straightened slowly. "We should probably not be talking," she said. "Probably," he agreed. He didn't move, neither did she. Outside, the city continued its indifferent noise, taxis and distant sirens, and the low percussion of a Thursday night in Manhattan. Inside the bar, the space between Emma and Ryan held something unnamed and inconvenient, something that had no place in any strategy either of them had ever written. Neither of them reached for their phones. The bar closed at 2. Neither of them had noticed the crowd thinning until the bartender set down a small white bill between them with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned not to interrupt. Emma looked at it, then at the nearly empty room, then at the clock above the liquor shelf. The pianist had packed up 20 minutes ago. Somewhere along the way, the night had stopped being something she was simply passing through. She reached for the bill. Ryan's hand covered hers before she could take it. It lasted less than 2 seconds. He pulled back, she pulled back, and for a moment the air between them had the specific charge of something that had almost happened. "I've got it," he said. "You absolutely do not. Consider it a professional courtesy. Consider it a conflict of interest." She slid her card toward the bartender before Ryan could argue further, and she didn't look at her own hand, which still felt the warmth of his like a small, inconvenient fact. They walked out together without deciding to. That was the thing she would think about later, how neither of them said "shall we" or "same direction." They simply stood from their stools at the same moment, moved toward the door at the same pace, and stepped out into the night air side by side, as if the decision had already been made somewhere below the level of conscious thought. Manhattan at this hour was a different city. The urgency had drained out of it, leaving behind something slower and almost intimate. The yellow wash of streetlights, a few cabs ghosting past, the distant sound of music from somewhere above them. Emma breathed it in and felt the tension in her shoulders release another fraction. They walked without a destination. She knew it. He knew it. No one said anything about it. "You grew up here?" Ryan asked after half a block. "Upper East Side. You?" "Jersey. Came here for school and never left." "Jersey," she repeated, with just enough weight to make him glance over. "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." She smiled, a real one, unguarded, the kind that came out when she wasn't monitoring herself. She heard him exhale beside her, something that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a laugh, and when she glanced over, his expression had shifted into something she hadn't seen on him before. Softer, maybe. Off guard. "There it is," he said quietly. "What?" "Nothing." He looked forward again. "Keep walking." They passed a closed bookshop, its window display lit softly from inside, paperbacks arranged around a small ceramic lamp. Emma slowed without meaning to, drawn by the particular warmth of it, all those spines promising other people's lives, other versions of ordinary evenings. "My mother used to take me to a shop like this," she said. "Every Saturday when I was small. She'd let me pick one book, and we'd go for hot chocolate after." She paused. "She died when I was 16. The words came out without ceremony, the way things sometimes did at 2 in the morning on empty streets. She hadn't planned to say it. She waited for the usual response, the careful condolences, the sympathetic tilt of the head. Ryan said nothing for a moment, then, "That's a good memory to carry." Not "I'm sorry." Not the practiced softness people offered like a transaction. Just acknowledgement. That the memory was real and worth having, and hers. Something moved in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. They kept walking. Their arms were close enough now that once, when she turned slightly to look at something across the street, her shoulder brushed his. He didn't step away. She didn't either. The city lights reflected in the wet pavement ahead of them, long and gold and wavering, and Emma Calloway walked through the night beside the last person she had ever expected to feel comfortable with, already knowing, somewhere beneath all the careful logic she lived by, that something had quietly, irrevocably begun. She just wasn't ready to call it by name yet. The cafe was the kind of place that had no business being open at 3 in the morning. Small, warmly lit, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the smell of espresso so deeply embedded in the walls that it probably existed before the building did. Emma had passed it 100 times without going in. Tonight it pulled at her like something familiar. Ryan held the door. She didn't comment on it. He didn't make it a gesture. It was just a door held open, and she walked through it into the warmth and the smell of coffee and something baked hours ago that lingered sweetly in the air. They took a corner table without discussing it, the instinct for privacy apparently shared. A young woman with a short ponytail and paint-stained fingers brought them coffee without being asked. Emma wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug and felt the heat move through her palms, up her wrists, into the particular cold that had been living in her chest for longer than she wanted to admit. "You don't sleep much," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. "How would you know that?" "The 7 a.m. emails, the timestamps." She looked up. "You noticed my timestamps." "I notice things." He said it simply, without weight, which somehow gave it more. He was watching her with that same quality of attention she'd felt at the bar, not aggressive, not strategic, just present. It was, she was realizing, the most unsettling thing about him. "My father started the company when I was 4, she said. She didn't plan it. The words just found their way out, maybe because the coffee was warm and the hour was strange, and his attention felt, inexplicably, like a place she could set something down. He built it from nothing, genuinely nothing. He had 3 employees and a lease on a space that flooded every winter." She paused. "Now I'm supposed to protect something I didn't build, in front of people who will always see me as the founder's daughter first." "And what do you see yourself as?" The question landed cleanly, without pity or professional calculation. Emma turned her mug slowly between her hands. "Someone who is very tired," she said, "of pretending that's not exhausting." The cafe was quiet around them. Somewhere behind the counter, the young woman hummed something low and tuneless. Outside, a car passed with its windows down, trailing a few seconds of music before disappearing. Ryan looked at his coffee for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to something quieter, less constructed. "My father wanted me to take over his landscaping business," he said. "He'd built it up over 30 years. Good work, honest work. When I told him I was going into finance, he didn't speak to me for 2 months. He exhaled. I told myself it didn't matter, that he'd understand eventually. A beat. He died before we finished working it out." Emma didn't offer condolences. She understood now why he hadn't offered them to her earlier, because what people like them needed wasn't sympathy. It was just someone who didn't flinch. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Every day." He met her eyes. "But I don't regret what I built. I've learned to hold both things." She absorbed that in silence. The space between them had changed again, softer now, less defended. She could see the tiredness in him that had nothing to do with the hour, the particular weight of a man who had learned to carry his grief quietly and efficiently, the way he carried everything else. Without thinking, she reached across the table and touched the back of his hand, just briefly, just the tips of her fingers against his knuckles, a contact so small it could barely be named. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the city exhaled its slow, indifferent breath. Inside, in a corner cafe that had no business being open at 3 in the morning, something between Emma Calloway and Ryan Callister had crossed a line that neither of them had meant to approach. And the terrifying thing, the thing she carried all the way home in the back of a cab as dawn began to threaten the edges of the sky, was that she wasn't sure she wanted to cross back. She woke up at 7:43 with her heels still on. Emma sat up slowly, registered the grey morning light pressing through the curtains, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of stillness before the day began its usual assault. Her phone was on the nightstand with 17 notifications she hadn't seen yet. Her laptop was open on the desk, mid-document, the cursor blinking with the patience of something that had been waiting all night. She showered, changed, and made coffee with the mechanical precision of someone rebuilding their defenses, one small ritual at a time. By 8:15 she was at her desk, hair pulled back, the previous night folded neatly into a compartment she intended to keep closed. Then she opened the contracts folder. The document was 43 pages, flagged urgent by her legal team with a note that had arrived at 6:30 a.m. A proposed acquisition, aggressive terms, a timeline designed to pressure, structured in the particular way that suggested someone had spent considerable time understanding exactly where her father's company was most exposed. The acquiring entity was Callister Capital. Emma read the name twice. Then she set down her coffee very carefully, the way you set down something fragile when your hands have started to feel unreliable. She went through the terms with the focused detachment of someone diffusing something. Clause by clause, page by page, The picture assembled itself with horrible clarity. Ryan's company was moving against her father's real estate holdings in a way that was technically legal, strategically elegant, and designed to be almost impossible to counter within the response window they'd been given. She thought about the cafe, the corner table, his hand beneath her fingers. She closed the document. For a long moment she sat very still, looking at nothing in particular, while something in her chest performed a slow, quiet collapse that she refused to acknowledge as what it actually was. Then she opened the document again and got to work. Across the city, Ryan was in his office by 8, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the way he kept losing the thread of the morning briefing. His chief of staff was going through Q3 projections with her usual precision, and Ryan was nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind returned, without permission, to a corner cafe and the particular way Emma Calloway had touched the back of his hand. He'd initiated the Calloway acquisition 6 weeks ago. It had been a straightforward strategic decision. They were undervalued, overextended, and the timing was clean. He hadn't thought about it beyond the numbers. That was before last night. Ryan. His chief of staff had stopped talking. She was looking at him with the expression she reserved for moments when he was somewhere else entirely. "Do you want me to come back?" "No." He straightened. "Continue." But after she left, he pulled up the Calloway file and read through it again, not as a strategy document this time, but as something that now had a face attached to it. A face that had laughed genuinely for the first time in months, by her own admission. A woman who carried her mother's memory like a lamp in a bookshop window and who was exhausted in the way that only people who never stop moving get exhausted. He thought about what she would feel when she opened those documents this morning. He already knew. He'd watched her build the walls back up in real time during that cab she'd pretended not to share the direction of. He knew exactly what Emma Calloway looked like when she was protecting herself. His phone lit up on the desk. Unknown number, but the area code was hers. He let it ring once, twice. On the third ring, he picked up. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, but the kind that was full of something being decided. "You knew," she said finally. Her voice was controlled. Impressively so. He didn't insult her by pretending otherwise. The file was in motion before last night. Another silence. Longer this time. "Don't call me," she said. "Don't explain. And whatever you think happened in that bar." It didn't. The line went dead. Ryan set the phone down slowly and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, grey and indifferent under the morning cloud, and felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time, the specific uncomfortable weight of having done the right thing professionally and entirely the wrong thing as a person. He didn't reach for the phone again, but he didn't open another file either. The conference room on the 31st floor had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Midtown that people usually pause to appreciate. Nobody paused today. Emma arrived 4 minutes early, which was intentional. She chose the seat with its back to the window, light behind her, faces visible, the minor tactical advantage of making everyone else squint slightly. She arranged her documents, uncapped her pen, and when her legal team filed in, she greeted them with the calm, measured attention of someone who had slept perfectly and felt absolutely nothing complicated. Ryan arrived with 2 colleagues at exactly the scheduled time. He wore charcoal grey, no tie, and the particular expression he reserved for rooms where he expected resistance. His eyes found her immediately. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in the room's atmosphere like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. She looked at her documents. "Ms. Calloway." His voice was professionally neutral. "Mr. Callister." So was hers. They sat across from each other with the length of a mahogany table between them and began. Emma had prepared for this the way she prepared for everything that mattered, completely, obsessively, from every angle. She countered their opening terms with precision that made her own legal team sit slightly straighter. She anticipated 3 of Ryan's arguments before he made them and had responses already formed, delivered without visible satisfaction, just clean and direct and unassailable. Ryan pushed back. He was good, she already knew that, had known it professionally for 2 years, but today she watched him work with a different kind of attention, the way you watch something you've seen up close. His hands were still on the table when he listened. He didn't interrupt. When he disagreed, he did it without theatre, just fact layered on fact, and there was a precision to it that she recognized because she'd seen it in a different context entirely. In a cafe at 3 in the morning, when he talked about his father without flinching. She pushed the thought away and kept her voice level. An hour in, Ryan's colleague leaned over to say something in a low voice, and Ryan shifted in his chair, just slightly, a small adjustment that brought him a fraction closer to the edge of the table, closer to her side of it. Emma was mid-sentence when it happened, and she finished the sentence without breaking rhythm, but her hand, resting beside her notepad, tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. She was almost certain he didn't notice. Then she looked up and found him watching her hand. He looked away first, back to his documents, expression unchanged, and said something precise and relevant about the response window timeline. His colleague nodded. Emma's lawyer made a note. Emma uncurled her fingers slowly around the pen and said nothing about any of it. The meeting broke for a 10-minute recess just before noon. Emma's team moved toward the coffee station at the far end of the room. Ryan's colleague stepped into the hallway, and somehow, through no choreography she could identify, Emma and Ryan were both standing at the window with several feet between them and no one else nearby. The city stretched below them, indifferent and vast. "You're holding the Mercer clause as a blocking mechanism," he said quietly, not accusatory, almost respectful. "Obviously," she said, "it won't hold past the second review window. It doesn't need to. It needs to hold long enough." A pause. Below them, tiny yellow cabs moved through the grid of streets like slow signals. "You're good at this," he said, the same tone he'd used in the bar, the one that wasn't quite a compliment and wasn't quite something else, hovering precisely between the two. "Don't," she said quietly. "I'm not doing anything. You're doing exactly what you're doing." She turned from the window. "And it won't work here." She walked back toward the table before he could respond. But her hand was unsteady as she pulled out her chair, and she kept it below the table's edge where no one could see. No one except Ryan, who had watched her sit down with an expression she refused to interpret, something that looked less like a rival calculating his next move, and more like a man trying very hard not to show that he'd already lost the thread of something important. He didn't use whatever advantage that moment might have offered. And somehow that was the most disorienting thing of all. The event was a charity gala for a children's foundation, black tie rooftop venue, the kind of Manhattan night that existed specifically to remind everyone that the city could be genuinely beautiful when it wanted to be. Emma had committed to attending 6 weeks ago, long before any of this, and she wasn't the kind of person who cancelled because things had become uncomfortable. She arrived in a black gown with a structured bodice, and her mother's small diamond earrings, her hair pulled up in a way that had taken 20 minutes and was supposed to look effortless. Her father's business partner greeted her at the entrance. She smiled, accepted a glass of champagne she didn't particularly want, and moved through the room with the ease of someone who had been doing this since she was old enough to stand beside her father at functions like these. She didn't expect Ryan to be here. She should have. Their worlds were smaller than they appeared from the outside. Same city, same industry, same narrow circuit of events. But seeing him across the room, in a dark suit that fit with the quiet confidence of someone who'd stopped trying to impress anyone, still landed somewhere in her chest with more force than she was prepared for. He saw her at almost the same moment. Neither of them waved. Neither looked away immediately either. It was the particular standoff of two people who had decided to be professional about something that was becoming increasingly difficult to be professional about. She turned back to her conversation. For the next hour, they orbited the room in careful opposition, approaching the same clusters of people at different times, maintaining the unspoken agreement of distance with the discipline of something that required actual effort. Emma talked about the Foundation's work with genuine warmth. She laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions, and felt underneath all of it the low, persistent awareness of exactly where Ryan Callister was in the room at any given moment. It was exhausting. The orchestra shifted into something slower just before 9. Couples drifted toward the small dance floor near the terrace edge, the city glittering beyond the railing in every direction. Emma had moved to the quieter side of the rooftop, needing a moment of genuine stillness, when she heard his voice just behind her. "I'm not going to apologize for the acquisition," he said, "but I want to explain it." She turned. He was closer than she'd expected, the city light catching the angles of his face, and she had the brief, irrational thought that this was an unfair setting for a conversation she needed to be composed for. "I don't need your explanation," she said. "I know you don't need it." He held her gaze. "I'm offering it anyway." A beat of silence passed between them. Around them, the music swelled gently. "The file was initiated before we met," he said. "Before the bar, before any of it. When I saw you that night, I didn't know you'd be connected to it." "And when you realized?" He didn't answer immediately. That small pause told her more than a prepared response would have. "Dance with me," he said quietly. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He extended his hand, palm up, an offering without pressure. "Dance with me anyway." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Every reasonable part of her had a clear position on this. The music moved slow and low around them, and the city spread out beyond the railing like something endless. And Emma Calloway, who was excellent at reasonable positions, took his hand. They moved to the edge of the dance floor, away from the center, where the light was softer and the crowd thinner. His hand settled at the curve of her waist, with a certainty that felt less like presumption and more like something returning to where it had always belonged. Her hand rested against his shoulder, and she felt the warmth of him through the fabric, steady and real. They didn't speak for the length of a full song. Then, close to her ear, quiet enough that it belonged only to her. "That night hasn't left me. Not 1 hour of it." Emma closed her eyes briefly. Just briefly. When she opened them, she stepped back, gently, deliberately, with the care of someone handling something that could break. She looked at him once, long enough for him to see what she wasn't saying, everything she wasn't saying, and then she turned and walked toward the exit with measured steps. She didn't run, she didn't look back. But her hand, the one that had held his, stayed warm for the rest of the night. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and it wasn't from Ryan. It was from her father's CFO, a man named Gerald who had been with the company since before Emma was born, and who never called before 9 unless something was genuinely wrong. His voice was careful in the way that careful voices got when they were managing the distance between bad news and catastrophe. The acquisition pressure had triggered a covenant clause in one of her father's oldest financing agreements. The bank was reviewing. The timeline was brutal, and Callister Capital, as the initiating party, held a position that could either accelerate the damage or, if they chose to restructure their approach, dissolve it entirely. Gerald said the words "restructure their approach" with the particular delicacy of a man suggesting something he wasn't sure was possible. Emma thanked him, hung up and sat for a long moment in the silence of her apartment, still in the oversized shirt she'd slept in, coffee going cold on the counter, morning light falling across the floor in long, pale strips. She thought about her father, who was 71 now and had built something from nothing and trusted her to carry it forward. She thought about the employees, the history, the weight of all of it. Then she picked up her phone and called Ryan. He answered on the second ring. "I know why you're calling," he said. "Then you know what I need." A pause. Not a calculating one. She had learned, somewhere between a bar and a cafe and a rooftop dance floor, to read the texture of his silences. This one was the kind that meant he was being honest with himself about something. "Come to my office," he said. She wore black trousers and a cream blouse and her mother's earrings, and she told herself it was armor, not significance. The lobby of Callister Capital's building was all steel and glass and clean lines, the kind of architecture that said we have already decided we're serious. A receptionist led her to a corner office on the 28th floor without small talk. Ryan was standing at the window when she walked in. He turned, and for a moment neither of them performed anything. No professional neutrality, no careful distance. Just two people in a room with too much history for the short time they'd known each other. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Of course you would." He moved to his desk and opened a folder, one she recognized by its color coding as the Callaway acquisition file. He turned it toward her. She stepped closer, close enough to see the document, close enough to catch the cedar dark scent of him that she had been trying not to remember. The terms had been restructured, completely. The covenant pressure dissolved, the timeline extended to something workable, the positioning shifted from aggressive acquisition to a proposed partnership framework, one that protected her father's legacy while creating room for genuine growth. It was elegant and thorough and had clearly taken significant work. Emma read it twice. Her throat tightened in a way she didn't try to control. "When did you do this?" she asked quietly. "The night of the gala." She looked up. He was watching her with that particular stillness of his, the one she'd first seen in a dark bar corner and had been trying to categorize ever since. "Ryan, I don't want your company," he said. His voice was steady and low and entirely certain. "I never wanted it the way the file made it look." He paused. "I want—" He stopped, started again. "I spent a long time building things as a way of not having to need anything. It's a very efficient system until it isn't." Emma set the document down slowly. She crossed the space between them without deciding to, the same way they'd walked out of the bar together, the same wordless momentum that kept overruling every careful argument she made to herself. She stopped close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze, and she put her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm, faster than his composure suggested. "You restructured the entire deal," she said. "Yes, for me. For the version of you I met at 3 in the morning in a cafe that had no business being open." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it gently against his chest. "The one who talks about her mother and gets honest when she's tired and laughs like she forgot she wasn't supposed to." Emma felt something in her chest loosen, something she had been holding tightly for a very long time. Something that had nothing to do with the acquisition and everything to do with the particular exhaustion of keeping people at a careful, managed distance. "I'm very difficult," she said. "I know. I work too much and I don't apologize easily, and I will absolutely argue with you in professional settings. I'm counting on it." The corner of his mouth curved, and his free hand moved to her face, slowly giving her every opportunity to step back. His thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that felt almost unbearably tender. She didn't step back. When he kissed her, it was unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask permission so much as finally acknowledge something that had been true for a while. Her hand curled into the lapel of his jacket, and she felt him exhale against her mouth, the long, slow release of a man setting something heavy down after carrying it too far. They stood like that for a long moment, the city spread out behind them through the floor-to-ceiling glass, indifferent and brilliant and entirely unaware that something small and irreversible had just happened in a corner office on the 28th floor. When she finally pulled back, just enough to look at him, his eyes were open and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, stripped of strategy, stripped of armor. Just Ryan. Just the man from Jersey who had never quite made peace with everything he'd left behind, holding on to her like she was something he intended to keep. "Dinner," he said. "Tonight. Somewhere that's not a negotiation." Emma considered this for exactly 1 second. "Somewhere with good whiskey," she said. He smiled, fully, genuinely, the kind that reached everything, and she decided, quietly and without ceremony, that this was her favorite version of him, the one nobody else got to see. "I know a place," he said. "Some people enter your life like a negotiation, all terms and distance and careful positioning. Ryan entered Emma's like a truth she hadn't known she was ready to hear. He didn't save her. She didn't need saving. He simply chose her, fully and without strategy, and she chose him back. Because the bravest thing 2 guarded people can do is decide that one person is worth the risk of being known. If this story touched something in you, leave a like and subscribe. It means more than you know. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And if you want more stories like this one, deeper, more intense, without interruptions, the link is in the first pinned comment. See you in the next one.